You lie there in the darkness, eyes open, watching the ceiling become your interrogation room. 3 a.m. again. The same silent torture, night after night, while the world sleeps around you in what feels like a conspiracy of peace you're no longer invited to join. Your mind races through tomorrow's obligations, yesterday's failures, the conversation you had 6 years ago that still makes you cringe. You've tried everything. The sleep hygiene protocols, the magnesium supplements, the meditation apps with their infuriatingly calm voices telling you to just breathe, just relax, just let go. But you can't let go because something inside you refuses to surrender. And here's what nobody tells you, what Carl Jung discovered in his own battles with sleeplessness and in the tortured nights of hundreds of patients who came to him desperate and exhausted. Your insomnia isn't a malfunction, it's a message. And the reason you can't sleep is because your psyche is staging a rebellion against a life that's betraying your soul. The modern world calls insomnia a disorder, something to medicate into submission, a problem to solve with pills and sleep-tracking devices and cognitive behavioral therapy. But Jung saw it differently. He understood that when consciousness refuses to surrender at night, when your mind won't grant you the mercy of oblivion, something in your unconscious is demanding to be heard. Your sleeplessness is your psyche's emergency broadcast system, and it's been trying to reach you because the daytime you, the one performing and producing and pretending, has stopped listening entirely. This epidemic of sleeplessness sweeping across the modern world isn't random. It's not just blue light and caffeine and stress, though those play their parts. It's the collective scream of millions of psyches trying to wake their hosts up to the fact that they're living lives that have nothing to do with who they actually are. You're exhausted during the day from maintaining a persona that requires constant energy to sustain, and then you're wired at night because your authentic self finally has a chance to speak, and it's furious about what you've been doing with your one precious life. Jung called this the unlived life, and it's the first root of insomnia that nobody wants to examine. Every dream you deferred, every authentic impulse you suppressed, every time you chose safety over truth, your soul took note. And now in the darkness, when the performance finally ends and you're alone with yourself, all that unlived potential comes howling back. The career you never pursued because it wasn't practical. The relationship you stayed in because leaving felt too hard. The creativity you buried because it didn't pay the bills. The person you could have become if you'd been brave enough to disappoint everyone who needed you to stay small. Your insomnia is your soul's refusal to rest while you're wasting your life. It's that simple and that devastating. You cannot sleep peacefully while living inauthentically. The psyche won't allow it. Jung understood that sleep requires a kind of trust, a surrender to the unconscious. And how can you surrender to an unconscious that you've been betraying every single day? How can you trust the darkness when you've been running from your own depths for years? But the unlived life is just the beginning. There's something else prowling through your nighttime hours, something Jung called the shadow. These are the aspects of yourself you've rejected, the qualities you've deemed unacceptable, the emotions you've labeled as wrong. Your anger, your selfishness, your sexuality, your aggression, your darkness. During the day, you keep these parts locked away, but at night, when your defenses are down, they come scratching at the door of consciousness. You lie there feeling anxiety that seems to have no source. But Jung would tell you it has a very specific source. It's the moral anxiety of having abandoned parts of yourself. It's the exhaustion of the internal civil war you've been waging, trying to be only light when you're made of both light and shadow. What you deny by day literally haunts you in darkness. That rage you've never expressed, it's there at 3 a.m., making your heart race. That grief you've never processed, it's there, sitting on your chest like a weight. That desire you've never acknowledged, it's there, keeping you restless and unsettled. Your shadow doesn't sleep, and it won't let you sleep either until you stop pretending it doesn't exist. The psyche demands integration, and insomnia is what happens when you refuse the invitation. Then there's the third route, the one that sounds almost mystical but is devastatingly practical. Modern life has severed your connection to what Jung called the collective unconscious, the archetypal rhythms that have governed human sleep for millennia. Your ancestors rose with the sun and slept with the darkness. Their lives followed seasonal patterns, lunar cycles, natural rhythms that your body still remembers, even though your lifestyle has completely abandoned them. You live in artificial light, stare at screens until midnight, eat at irregular hours, work against your circadian biology, and then wonder why sleep eludes you. But it's deeper than just circadian disruption. Jung understood that humans need ritual, need sacred transitions, need ways to mark the passage from day consciousness to night consciousness. Your ancestors had evening prayers, storytelling around fires, communal rituals that signaled to the psyche that it was time to descend into the underworld of sleep. You have Netflix and social media scrolling. You have no sacred threshold between the demands of the day and the surrender of the night. You just collapse into bed with your mind still running at full speed, and you expect your psyche to just shut down like a machine. It won't. It can't, because you've given it no bridge between the worlds. And finally, there's the fourth root that Jung identified, the one that manifests as a particular kind of exhaustion, the anima and animus conflict, the internal masculine and feminine energies at war within you. In Jungian psychology, regardless of your gender, you contain both masculine and feminine principles. The masculine energy of doing, achieving, controlling, pushing forward. The feminine energy of being, receiving, surrendering, allowing. Modern culture has glorified the masculine principle to the point of pathology. You're rewarded for constant productivity, for never stopping, for always pushing. The feminine principle of rest, of receptivity, of surrender has been devalued as weakness. So you live in a state of perpetual masculine overdrive, and then you wonder why you can't surrender into sleep, which requires the ultimate feminine act of letting go. You're trying to control your way into sleep, which is like trying to force yourself to fall in love. It's a category error. Sleep requires trust, surrender, a willingness to lose control and descend into the unknown. But you've been trained to never surrender, never stop performing, never let your guard down. Your insomnia is the price of this imbalance. What Jung discovered, what he saw in patient after patient, was that insomnia isn't primarily a physical problem. It's psychological warfare made manifest in the body. Every unresolved complex, every denied emotion, every unlived possibility creates actual physiological changes. Your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline because your psyche is genuinely under threat, not from external danger but from internal betrayal. The anxiety you feel isn't irrational. It's your soul's rational response to a life being lived in bad faith. You've been treating insomnia like it's your enemy, something to defeat, to medicate away, to solve with better sleep hygiene and blackout curtains. But Jung discovered something that changes everything. What if your insomnia isn't the problem at all? What if it's the cure trying to happen? What if those sleepless nights are actually your psyche's most desperate attempt to force you into the transformation you've been avoiding during every waking hour? This is where everything inverts. This is where we stop fighting and start listening. Because insomnia, in Jung's framework, isn't a disorder. It's an initiation. It's the unconscious refusing to let you continue sleepwalking through your own life. The night becomes your teacher, and the lesson is brutal but necessary. You cannot rest until you become real. Let me show you what Jung meant by this. When he worked with his own periods of sleeplessness, particularly during his confrontation with the unconscious after his break with Freud, he didn't reach for sedatives. He reached deeper. He asked the question that transforms everything. Not how do I make this stop, but what is this trying to make me see? And what he discovered became the foundation for actually healing insomnia at its psychological root. The technique is called active imagination, and it's the opposite of everything you've been told to do at 3 in the morning. You've been told to get up, read something boring, drink warm milk, practice progressive muscle relaxation, all of it designed to distract you from what's actually happening. Jung said no. Stay in bed. Stay in the darkness, and instead of fighting the anxiety, the racing thoughts, the unnamed dread, turn toward it. Face it directly. Give it form. Here's how it works. When you wake at 3 a.m. with that familiar surge of panic, that feeling of dread with no clear object, you don't try to rationalize it away. You don't tell yourself comforting lies about how everything is fine. Instead, you ask it a question. What are you? What form do you take? And then you wait. You let an image emerge from the darkness. Maybe it's a figure, a shadow, an animal, a landscape. Whatever comes, you don't judge it. You engage it. You ask it what it wants. Why it won't let you sleep. What it needs from you. This sounds insane to the rational mind. It sounds like you're inducing psychosis, talking to hallucinations in the middle of the night. But Jung understood something profound. These images aren't hallucinations. They're the language of the unconscious. They're how the parts of yourself that you've exiled try to communicate. And they will keep you awake, night after night, until you finally listen. One of Jung's patients, a successful businessman who hadn't slept properly in 2 years, did this practice. At 3 a.m., instead of reaching for his phone or his anxiety medication, he closed his eyes and asked his insomnia to show itself. What emerged was an image of himself as a child, maybe 8 years old, standing outside a locked door, crying. The adult self asked the child, "Why are you here?" And the child said, "Because you locked me out when you decided to become what father wanted instead of what you were." The businessman realized in that moment that his insomnia began exactly when he sold his small bookstore to take over his father's manufacturing company. The child was the part of himself that loved literature, creativity, quiet contemplation. The part he murdered to fulfill someone else's vision of success. And that murdered part was haunting him every single night, demanding recognition, demanding life. He didn't quit his job the next day, but he started reading again. He started writing. He made space for that exiled child. And within 3 weeks, he was sleeping through the night for the first time in 2 years. Not because he fixed his sleep, because he fixed his life. This is shadow work at its most practical and most powerful. Your insomnia is often a rejected aspect of yourself that has become so desperate for attention, it's willing to torture you to get it. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is everything you've decided you're not allowed to be. If you've built your identity on being strong, your shadow contains your vulnerability. If you've built it on being good, your shadow contains your rage, your selfishness, your darkness. And these rejected qualities don't just disappear. They gain power in the unconscious. They become autonomous, and they will sabotage your sleep, your relationships, your health, until you finally integrate them. Stop watching. Go to the comments and write, "I see my shadow." Do it now. The practice for this is deceptively simple but psychologically demanding. On nights when you cannot sleep, instead of fighting, you write. But you don't write about your day or your to-do list. You write to the thing keeping you awake. You give it a voice. You let it speak without censorship. I am the rage you've been swallowing for 20 years. I am the ambition you killed to make others comfortable. I am the sexuality you've been ashamed of since childhood. Whatever comes through, you let it come. You don't argue with it. You don't try to be reasonable. You let the shadow speak its truth. And here's what happens that seems like magic but is actually psychological law. When you give these rejected parts recognition, when you stop fighting them and start integrating them, they stop fighting you. The internal war ends. And when the internal war ends, sleep becomes possible again. Not because you've defeated anything, but because you've made peace. But there's another dimension to this that Jung considered equally important. The anima and animus, the internal feminine and masculine principles and how their warfare manifests as sleeplessness. For men who've over-identified with masculine doing, achieving, controlling, the rejected anima, the feminine principle of being, receiving, surrendering, becomes the night tormentor. You cannot sleep because sleep requires surrender, and surrender is what you've trained yourself never to do. For women who've over-identified with feminine accommodation, emotional labor, self-sacrifice, the rejected animus, the masculine principle of assertion, boundaries, self-advocacy, keeps them awake with resentment and unexpressed anger. You lie awake rehearsing conversations you'll never have, arguments you'll never make, boundaries you'll never set. The practice here is about balance, about reclaiming what you've rejected. If you're a man who cannot surrender, your evening practice becomes conscious letting go, not just of tasks, but of control itself. You practice receiving instead of giving, being instead of doing. You might lie in bed and consciously say, I release my grip. I trust the darkness. I allow myself to be held. This feels dangerous because it is dangerous to the ego. But it's necessary for sleep. If you're a woman who cannot assert, your evening practice becomes conscious boundary setting. You review your day not with acceptance, but with honest acknowledgement. I said yes when I meant no. I absorbed his anger instead of reflecting it back. I made myself small to make him comfortable. And you don't just acknowledge it, you practice the opposite, even if only in imagination. You speak the truth you didn't speak. You set the boundary you didn't set. You let the animus have its voice. What Jung discovered is that sleep requires psychological wholeness. You cannot rest when you're at war with yourself. You cannot surrender to the unconscious at night if you're rejecting the unconscious all day. This is why all the sleep hygiene in the world doesn't work for psychological insomnia. You can have perfect darkness, perfect temperature, perfect routine, and still lie awake for hours because the fundamental problem isn't environmental. It's existential. The other practice Jung emphasized, particularly for chronic insomnia, is dream work. But here's the paradox. Many insomniacs say, I can't remember my dreams, or I don't dream anymore. Jung would say, exactly. You've lost your connection to the unconscious so completely that even in sleep, when you do sleep, you're not actually meeting the deeper layers of yourself. The bridge is broken. And the psyche, in its wisdom, keeps you awake, because what's the point of sleeping if you're not actually accessing what sleep is for, which is the nightly dialogue with the unconscious? The practice is setting intention before sleep. You speak directly to your unconscious. I want to remember. I want to meet you. I'm ready to see what you have to show me. And you keep a journal by your bed, not for anxious thoughts, but for dream fragments. Even if you only remember a feeling, an image, a single word, you write it down. You honor it. You're telling your unconscious, I'm listening now. You don't have to keep me awake to get my attention. What happens over time is the bridge rebuilds. Dreams return, and with them natural sleep often returns, because the unconscious no longer needs to keep you conscious to communicate. It has another channel. This is why Jung insisted that dream deprivation, whether from medication or psychological disconnection, actually perpetuates insomnia. You're cutting off the very mechanism that would resolve it. Now, let's talk about what Jung called archetypal rhythms and why their disruption creates sleeplessness that no amount of individual psychology can fix. We live in a world that has severed us from natural cycles. We have artificial light that tricks our biology into thinking it's always day. We have screens that emit blue light directly into our eyes hours before bed. We have 24-hour news cycles, email, social media, constant stimulation, and we wonder why we can't sleep. But Jung's insight went deeper than circadian biology. He understood that humans are not just biological organisms, but psychological and spiritual beings who need ritual, rhythm, and sacred transition. For thousands of years, humans had evening rituals. The lighting of fires, the telling of stories, the gradual descent from day consciousness to night consciousness. These weren't just quaint customs. They were psychological technologies that prepared the psyche for sleep. Modern life has eliminated all of this. You go from staring at a computer screen to staring at a television screen to staring at a phone screen to expecting your brain to suddenly shift into sleep mode. It's not a failure of willpower. It's a failure of ritual. Your psyche needs a bridge from the outer world to the inner world, and you're not giving it one.